Welcome to day 2 of the Nativity Stitch Along. Today we're going to be working on Satin Stitch and Backstitch here in the manger. So let's get started. If we take a look here at our diagram, you can see that Satin Stitch here is done with 3 strands of 840. Now if your pattern does not say 840 here, that's because I made a mistake on the first version of the pattern. You should have received an email that tells you how to get this corrected version. If you did not receive an email, please send me a direct message or an email to hello@nellandjoecrafts.com so that I can get you this correct version. So 3 strands of 840 is what we need to start with. So I have a section here of 840 floss. You want to work with sections of floss that are about 24 to 36 inches long. That's going to be, I don't know, like as long as your arm, give or take. You don't want to do too long because then it'll get tangled, but too short and you'll have to change your floss all the time. So you can see that a normal strand of floss has 6 pieces to it. We're going to only work with 3 of those. So the easiest and most reliable way to get these separated into 3 is to fan at the end, and you're just going to take 1 strand here. You're going to grab it and then you pull it out. You can see it's going to bunch up in your hand. Don't worry. Pull, and then when it's all the way out, the rest just unravels back to where it should be. So we're going to do this 3 times to get our 3 strands that we need. Last one. Set that to the side. We'll need it later. So my 3 strands that I've just pulled out, I'm going to align the top ends together. And just straighten it all out all the way down. Make sure you don't have any lumps or bumps, knots or tangles. Now for 3 strands, we want to use an number 8 needle. Now this is a smaller needle. In embroidery needles, bigger numbers mean smaller needles. So this needle is a number 8 as opposed to this bigger one here, which is a number 3. Now, smaller because less strands. It's going to be easier to work with. Now, this is my favorite way to thread a needle. You can see that we have our threads all lined up next to each other, and I'm going to run this floss back and forth over the needle. Then pull down tight, slide it off the end of the needle, and I pinch it in my fingers. Then you're going to put the eye of the needle right over where the floss is, and then it should just, doing it through the camera, there we go, and it should just pop right on top and through the eye. If that method causes you stress or does not work, good old-fashioned lick the ends, make them nice and straight together, and slide it through also works just fine. So needle is threaded. The very first time I start, and honestly most of the time for the manger here, because we're doing nice tall satin stitches, we're just going to start with a knot. So I like to loop it around my finger 1 time and then just fold that end under and through to make a knot. You can always make a double knot if you feel like you're going to pull this little knot through, but 1 little knot is going to be just fine to start. So recap. We have 3 strands of floss in the smaller needle, a nice good section of thread to work with, and a knot at the end. Now, we're going to work on the middle of the manger first, and then we're going to go to the sides. Now, typically, I don't stitch in with a hoop stand like I am right now. I use the hoop stand here so that my hoop stays still and you can watch without getting dizzy. When I stitch by myself without the hoop stand, I rotate my hoop a lot so that I'm not necessarily stitching left to right or at an angle. I might turn it so I'm stitching top to bottom or bottom to top. So feel free to rotate your hoop as you go and you try this stitch. You don't need to commit to stitching straight on every time. So we're going to come up, in this case, on the left edge of our shape. This is our shape right here. Okay. And then you're just going to go down on the opposite edge of the shape, right on the line. And pull that down nice and snug. Then you're going to come back to the starting side and pull up. And then again, go down on the opposite side. And I'm coming up and down about 1 needle width away from my previous stitches. Keeping them nested nice and close together. Now the beauty of stitching this area first is that we're going to stitch on the sides next. So we don't have to worry too much about being exact on our edges, because the stitches for right here are going to meet up right against this, and they're going to cover them just a little bit. So any imperfections won't be seen later. So this is a really great spot to work on satin stitch and work on your ability to get your needle where you want it to be. Now, I like to think about when I do satin stitch, reminding myself, am I going up or down, on the line, over the line, or inside the line? And I pick one and then try and repeat that same placement every time I go I put the needle in. That will make a much smoother line. All right, since I'm doing really big stitches here, you can see that I might be able to get back to the other side, but this is probably short enough that I won't be able to get 2 more stitches, or another stitch finish. So I'll go down into the fabric, and then I'm gonna anchor this on the back. I'm gonna flip my hoop over and I'll show you how I do that. Okay, let's anchor this floss end. You could try and tie a little knot, or even make a little French knot here at the end, like wrap it around and pull it through. But I find that to be ineffective and time consuming. So what I'm gonna do is I'm just gonna kind of weave my needle here close to this stitch end through this thread and pull it through. And that is gonna hold my thread nice and snug, and it's not going to come undone. Then I trim this off nice and close, and I'll get my next section of floss ready, and then I will anchor to start instead of a knot, because I have something to anchor to now, and I basically need to do this exact same thing. Okay, so to anchor, I just went down on this side, so I'm going to want to come up on this side. So just like I anchored, I'm going to kind of weave my threads in here a little bit. Sorry, weave my needle through the threads and pull. Oop, that's a little too close. Try one more time. You want to leave a little bit of an end so that you can help hold it with your finger as you begin stitching and not pull it out on the first stitch. That's better. So a little end so that I can help hold it. Again, I'm going to flip you over and we will satin stitch some more. All right, we're ready to stitch again. So I've got my finger back here on that tail end that we just left sticking out a little bit. And I'm going to start stitching again. and I just pull until I feel all of the slack come out on the back, and then I stop pulling before the anchor comes out. Now, if you struggle with that or that gives you extra stress, just go ahead and tie a knot to start, and don't worry about it. It's not worth worrying about. Not a big deal. All right, now you can see here that I am going to stitch right over this horizontal line. And we're going to do that because A, we need to fill in the shape, and B, this horizontal line we just stitched over and this one right here, they are a reference for stitches that we're going to make in a little bit. Now you're going to think to yourself, Ashley, how can it be a reference if I can't see it now? Well, I will show you. The beauty of nice wide satin stitch like this is that I can just scoot this out of the way a little bit and I can see where that line is. There you go. So that when I need to find it again, I have a ballpark for where to look. Now I'm going to finish to the bottom here, and I'll meet you on the sides. All right, I have made it to the bottom here. And one thing I wanted to remind you is that when you're satin stitching over a large space like this, you want to make sure not to pull your stitches too tight, or you'll start to get gaps in the fabric and it'll start to be rumpled underneath. I was messing with mine because my hoop seemed to come loose a little bit, but make sure you're not pulling too hard or it'll start to be funny underneath the stitch. So here at the bottom, you can see I have some thread left. So I'm going to work next from this same side. I'm going down on. If I chose to come up all the way over here, you see there would be this big area that I crossed with my thread, as opposed to if I come up right here and do this bottom part, I'm only having a little bit of thread lost to the back of the hoop. Now, as we start to get stitching by other areas that have stitches on them, I want you to think of this rule of thumb for satin stitch, which is anytime possible, you want to come up into empty fabric, like I am here, and then go down either into empty fabric or by other stitches. It's much harder to come up next to existing stitches and much easier to go down next to existing stitches. Your needle tends to try and catch existing stitches and split them or catch them, whereas if you go down into existing stitches, your thread just pulls nicely along that area and doesn't cause problems. All right, I think 2 stitches more maybe here. Oh, yep, 1 more. And then you can see better what I'm talking about. That's a little cut there. One more. All right, this is the end of this section of floss. So I'm going to anchor and then I'm going to start again up over here. All right, new section of floss, and I'm going to come up here to this top corner and I'm going to come up into empty fabric, and then I'm going to go down basically in the same holes that are right here. right next to the existing stitches. And you can see as I pull down, it makes this nice seamless finish here. So then I'll go back to the top, up in open fabric, and then down by the existing stitches. All right, and then again, I'm gonna speed things up. I'll stitch the rest of the satin stitch, and then we will be ready for the back stitch. All right, we're back. You can see I finished all the sides, or you watched me finish the sides. You can also see that there's almost a little gap here, but I just brought this last stitch right up next to the edge. And even here, you can still see kind of the edge of these stitches. So you don't need to overlap it. You just want to cover all the fabric behind it, because we're going to run a line of stitching right here now. And we don't want to have this group of stitches interfering. So if we refer back to our diagram, we just did our satin stitch here, and now we're going to do back stitch 3781, 3 strands here, here, and then these accents in the manger. So to make a back stitch, you're going to make a small stitch by coming up at the top of the space and then down. You can see that I've nested the needle against these stitches and it's not catching any of these stitches. All right, so we make a small stitch right here to start. Then you're going to come up that same stitch length further down this line. Again, my stitch here is nice and close to this body of stitches, but not catching this section of stitches. Pull up. Now we go back, hence the back stitch, to this stitch, and we're going to use the same hole that is the end of this previous stitch. So we stick our needle in that hole and we pull down. And then we're just going to repeat the process all the way down here. I come up a stitch length away, and then I go down into the last stitch. Up a stitch length away, and down here. Now we're going to keep going till we get to the bottom here, and then we're going to do the same thing across here, following this line and the end of these stitches, and then we'll go back up this side. Then from here, I'll show you how we're going to find these lines here in the middle and know where to put some accent stitches. All right, stitched my 3 backstitch lines, and now we need to make the little accent marks, right? We need to make these guys right here. So First of all, these are going to be free form. There's no exact line telling you how long it needs to be. You're just going to use your best instincts and go with it. We are, however, going to think in our mind, you know, this is in thirds. So I'm going to look here for about where you can see there's my traced line, where that is, so that I have a guide mark in my mind right about the intersection of those two stitches for where this needs to happen. So I'm going to come up on the side right here where I just marked in my mind, and then I'm going to follow the lines of stitching here. I'm just going to go straight out a little bit, following those lines of stitching, and I'm just going to push right down in and pull that nice and snug. Then I'm going to come up on the side, and I think I'm going to leave a little space. Nope, I don't like that. There we go, that's better. Just a little space between these two. And I think this one I'm going to make just a little shorter. All right, while I'm on this side, I'm going to come down to where this line is. There we go, right about there. So I'm going to say it's about the middle of this stitch. And so I'll come up right about there where I was. Oh, sorry. I'm going to make a longer stitch. And this time I think I'm going to stick closer and make a shorter stitch. Now I'm going to jump to the other side, and I'm just going to visually match about where that my stitches on the right side are. The purpose of these stitches is just kind of accenting the fact that this is probably made out of pieces of wood and not one big plate of wood, you know, planks of wood. So we're just giving the illusion that there's more than one board here without having to take the time to individually stitch all those boards there. And again, coming up and just visually matching where my right side is. And I may be off by a needle width or two, and it will be just fine. These fun stitches are just about adding texture and a little bit of interest into a big space of stitching. I think I'll go on the top again, like the right hand side, but this time maybe a little closer. And down. All right. If all went according to plan, you should have some thread left on. Okay, you can see that I'm just combing my stitches here a little bit. That last stitch or two caught a couple of the strands in a way that I didn't like. So I'm just pulling these to the side a little bit to help them lay flat again. That's better. All right, as I was saying, you should have some floss left on your needle. Instead of anchoring it, I want you to just come up over here to the end of Jesus's head, and you're just going to bring your string to the top, and then stick it in, slide it under, and we're just going to hang out here until tomorrow when we'll do the manger stitching and some other detailed spots here, because this is a new stitch. This is going to be whipped back stitch. It's also worth noting while we're here that satin stitch is also used for the headscarf of Joseph and Mary. And these ones, you're just gonna pick an angle that's kind of the short way, not quite vertical. Let's do this with a needle. Not quite vertical, but a little angled, but also not at a 90-degree angle. So we're just gonna go for a little angle, and you'll just use 3 strands and go all the way up to this line for Mary, and for Joseph, you'll stitch up to his headband and then the top of his head in a different section. And those are all gonna be satin stitch. I think that's it for today. If you have any questions about satin stitch, backstitch, splitting floss, tying knots, threading your needle, drop them in the comments and I will get them answered. Happy day 2.